Thank you, and I'm sorry I'm late. I was asked by one of the top 4 journals in the world to write an article because it's coming up to the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And I chose to come to Pakistan, and I've lived and worked here for more than 10 years. So I thought I'd share what I'm writing in this article with you. Now, it's entitled Deja Vu at the Cusp of History. I'm fundamentally from Oxford. Deja vu means it's all happened before. And what we're seeing in a broad sense here is what the Christians went through 600 years ago. Because remember, Islam was founded more than 600 years after Christianity. And why are we looking at the same thing? Because 600 years ago, the printing press got invented, and people no longer accepted the dictates of the Catholic Church, the Christian Church. And that, of course, led to 300 years war, killing off half of South America, and all sorts of things, ultimately landing up with the rise of Western democracy, economic development, and the Industrial Revolution. Now that's all happening again now. It's 600 years later, and instead of the printing press, we've got IT. That's how Obama got elected. That is how Tunisia, Egypt, and places like that altered. So we're looking at the same process, because remember, the Industrial Revolution bypassed the colonial world and Islam. And there is now catching up to happen. So firstly, you've got to remember that you're looking at the same thing. And the answer is going to be, firstly, it's got to be decided by Islam. Are you going to choose a conservative religious thing at the cost of development? Or are you going to choose development at some cost to conservative religion? And that decision has to be made by Pakistan and all the other Islamic states. It's not going to be made by anybody else. The second thing, however, is we're living in a vastly more complicated world. There are more people now in India than there were in the whole world 100 years ago. That means that all the institutions of state are inadequate. I will only deal with educational, medical, justice, all those things are totally different, and the way we have of dealing with them is no good. Let's talk about democracy and politics. Democracy was designed in ancient Greece for 6,000 people, and they had slaves and women had no rights. Politics was, in fact, the civil administration of people, the polis, the people of the cities. What has happened in the more complex world? Politicians, in general, now use short-term tactics with no relevance at all to the people. They try to manipulate the people. The other thing about democracy is that, of course, when you look at what happens in this complexity, you're getting minority governments, and more importantly, you're getting extremists. So the process we're seeing here is the center focus of the world at present. It's called on the cusp of history. We people are at the cusp of history now. So what you have to look at then, I can go on for a long time about this, but let us look at the CIA agent who shot those two boys in Lahore. What that demonstrates is the kindness of Sharia law. They actually forgave him. Okay. Everybody was going on about all the other things, but that is the important thing. If you look at the Mehran capability, the Mehran attitude, first, there are only 4 points. 1, did we slip up? The answer is yes. 2, could we do better? And that's the only point of having an inquiry. We've got to do better next time. But I want to talk about the people, and the Americans in particular. What do the people do? Their first thing was their defensive, aggressive thing about get out the drones, do this, do that, etc. Whereas there are more people being killed in Pakistan by their own kind than anywhere else in the world. So drones, of course, are bad news. America, I'll carry on a little bit just now. But in fact, the real problem in the world is extremists. In this complicated world, they can be religious, they can be political, even economic. The extremists of the American Stock Exchange caused a worldwide problem. So the point about it is that the people must solve the problems themselves, and the enemy is within. Because historically, what countries and regions and empires survive? 3 characteristics. 1, you've got to have a strong government. Not necessarily, and this holds from the Chinese Han Dynasty, it goes that far back. It doesn't matter much whether it's a dictator or not. Secondly, you've got to have a rule of law, and thirdly, you've got to have accountability. And that's what we've got to be looking at in Pakistan. Now, I just want to say a few words about democracy. Now, democracy is enlightened self-interest. And that phrase was first done in colonial India, when people really realized what democracy was in a complicated world. Now, the point about that, the American democracy emphasizes the individual, because that's what happened to them when they had their Renaissance and Revolution. And of course, that doesn't work in this world, which largely has the extended family, has tribalized areas, etc. And the family, they are trying to destroy in America in their emphasis on the individual. So what we need certainly is democracy, but we need an Islamic democracy, I've pointed out. So instead of fighting with each other, we've got to see how we're going to modify democracy to suit our strong family ties, our strong tribal ties, etc. It's no good fighting with anybody else. That the answer lies with ourselves. And it's no good blaming your government. It's got to do with the people. For instance, people don't understand, they call Pakistan two-faced. But that's simply an extension of the family. A good question is, if your brother came to you and said he wanted to be a suicide bomber, what would you do? In the rest of the world, you'd report him to the authorities. Here you try to persuade him, etc. You wouldn't agree with him. You might even never speak to him again, but you would not report him. Now that is what we've got to deal with in Pakistan. You've got to emphasize India is better off because it had a Congress social movement that evolved into a political party. What we need now is to work out what sort of democracy we want, what sort of mix we need, and then decide that what they do for Pakistan is the right thing, not what they do for any political party or anything else. That is the way forward. And all these arguments about the Middle East, etc., have to do with casuistry. If you have a disagreement, you don't start with what you're fighting about, as they're doing in Israel and Palestine. You start with what you have in common, and then develop from that. And in Pakistan, it's obvious. We want a bigger and better Pakistan. I want my friends and family to come here because it's a wonderful country. Not refuse to come here because they're worried about being shot. Thank you.